tired of compliance talks that put you to sleep? We've got you covered. No slides, no fluff, just real-world insights from two compliance pros with over 50 years of experience. Stay ahead, stay informed, and stay entertained. This is compliance without the boring bits.
Welcome to the newest episode of Compliance Without the Boring Bits, hosted by Gustav and myself. Hello, Gustav.
So let's see if we can make it through without any boring stuff today.
Oh, I still have the sign with me.
So do I. So I'll start by talking about, January, what's going on. Now that we've been recording this, they say this has been the coldest January in 40 years here in Finland. As a new Finn, I'm getting to know how to cope with it. That means a lot of sauna, a lot of ice. And something I noticed is that the car I imported from Sweden does not cope well with the cold here. When it's
Oh,
minus 25 degrees, the car battery is like, no. And
oh, that
so,
is so bad. That
yeah,
is,
I had
is
to
it,
mix it with a Finnish battery.
is it one battery? Do you still have like an engine that turns, or is it all gone on battery?
No, the Finnish battery solved the problem. All
Uh,
good now. Are you experiencing the same thing in Germany? Are your
yeah,
batteries
well,
okay?
for the first time in my entire life, I went to Finland for a winter vacation and I saw the Northern Lights, which I've been told is actually quite rare because all the publications on Instagram are fake. But then, to my biggest surprise, I returned to Germany and
Yeah.
guess what I'm seeing? I'm seeing the Northern Lights in Germany. I mean,
Oh,
can you
really?
believe that? Right, so I made it all the way to Santa's hometown, only to find out that I could have stayed home where it was significantly warmer and still see the Northern Lights. So that was a very very interesting bit. But no, it was amazing. I just don't want to hear the first voices that are saying, so what about global warming, right? So mixing up weather and climate again, but no, it was amazing. So I'm sorry for your troubles, but I had no troubles whatsoever this past winter.
Well, you owe me now, Markus, because I lived here close to 20 years and I'm still to see the Northern Lights.
Yeah, you still have to go out at the right point in time.
So, speaking about going out the right part of time, I love that you say that because we're going to talk about going out of your ERP system, right? Talk about ERP upgrades. And we'll have a chat about your article on the importance of 2026 and
Mm,
your business's actions then, right? And then
mm.
some updates as well, won't we?
Yeah, I think it's time. If we don't want to be boring, really, I think we need to start focusing on what is really important. And my personal pain is to go through LinkedIn and only see people talk about actual mandates on electronic invoicing, as if that is the only thing that really matters at the moment. We have so many things going on with regards to AI. We have so many things going on with regards to technology changes and shifts. S4HANA, like big thing we're going to talk about today. So I think it's important that we are building the bigger picture and take people with us on this journey of what is really important, because that is where a lot of documents and discussions are not currently pointing towards. Yes.
Let's come back to what's really important because you wrote a good article on that, and instead start with the ERP transformations. And I mean, it sounds it sounds boring, doesn't it?
Yeah.
ERP
Yeah.
transformation. But this is something that is massive. We talk about all the mandates happening, but the ERP transformations is also something really massive in terms of the migrations that need to happen, especially with SAP, there's up to 28,000 companies worldwide that have to upgrade or from the current ECC version or whatever they have on SAP up to the S4 HANA.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that SAP, what? And then we're going to talk about some SAP today, but why should somebody who's not an SAP care about this?
It doesn't really matter. SAP is one of many software vendors, and yes, it's a big one, and yeah, it happens to come from Germany. But anyway, so the one thing why I believe it's so important is that there is a constant belief, and has been a constant belief for a very long time, that compliance, and particularly process design, is sort of to be solved by throwing software at something, right? I've just read an article, and in fact, I've written an article about why customizations that have happened over many, many years are not sustainable in a context where, particularly when we're talking about finance software, governments are now on scene trying to influence how businesses are processing transactions in real time, right? And so one of the key aspects that I'm seeing, and I'm sure that you've also in your customer engagements have seen the same thing, it is no longer a problem that you can solve by throwing new software at it. It is no longer a problem where you can trust your IT department to have the full scope and the full view on the actual problem. And that is why I believe, while there is this huge surge towards S/4HANA when it comes to SAP, very prominent, of course, because it affects thousands of businesses, it's not going to solve the problem at hand, right? Because the one thing that we need to look at is standardization. And my personal belief is that the e-invoicing mandates and the reporting mandates that are coming through, that have already been in Latin America for a long time, but now spread across the rest of the world. We're talking about VIDA here in Europe. This is what is going to really drive the need for standardization across processes. And I doubt that in most of those projects that are currently underway, the real process redesign and process optimization is enough at the center of people's attention.
Yeah, and this is exactly the thing we're trying to get at here, because we see a lot of these migration projects being led by IT, or having IT as a very big
Yeah,
part of responsibility, which is also how compliance is dealt with at some companies. And
yeah,
IT, they will be asking questions like, should we go greenfield, brownfield, bluefield, or what have you, and so on. And really, what we want to say here is that you should think of the ERP upgrade as something where you can really revolutionize on how you work with the whole compliance and whole audit trail, right?
yeah. I think if we are talking revolution, then probably people are going to get scared already, right? But if we're talking about a real making yourself honest, that's what I've used this morning when I was working on LinkedIn, right? We are comparing notes with consultants that are working, for example, across Germany with multinational organizations that are affected by the mandates, that are affected by the S/4HANA upgrade and all that kind of stuff. But these consultants are seeing exactly what you and I are discussing here on a regular basis. It's the fear to go and analyze and touch the status quo, right? Because this is what you and I have already said a lot of times. It's the change management aspect to the things that we're dealing with. We have legislation, and that's all theory. We have tax administrations that are publishing notes and requirements, and we have deadlines that are being published. But it requires your readiness in order to solve that problem. And if you're just thinking that additional software or a service provider is going to solve 100% of the problem, then you're going to probably fail, because the service provider will not know your accounting environment. They will not know the level of customizations that you have over the past maybe 30, 40 years accrued in your system environment. All of that needs cleaning up. All of that needs thorough, diligent reviews and a clear strategy and path forward, if that makes sense.
So we often talk, Markus, about the whole invoice audit trail. And in our recent report on compliance, where we, together with FT Longitude, examined where our business is in terms of compliance, only 24% of global companies answered that they had good compliance oversight. So when you look at the audit trail that we often talk about, can you give some like hands-on advice on what can a company do to improve that figure? How can you get better at your oversight when you do this ERP upgrade?
Yeah, I think what is important is that you are not managing compliance as an additional burden, right? Compliance, and you and I are advocates of that one. And I know that in your LinkedIn videos that you're publishing, which I, by the way, like a lot. I mean, I like the stamina that you have when you're on the frozen lake or in the frozen lake, and you're basically talking about a topic that I hardly can talk about when I'm sitting in the nice and warm. But kudos on that one, Gustav.
Thank you.
I think what we're seeing is that all of these individual items are siloed approaches. If you're looking at it just from one particular viewpoint, then you're not seeing the bigger picture, because compliance for invoices spans far wider than just the integration of invoice relevant data to a tax administration, right? If we are forgetting supply chain legislation, supplier vetting, KYC procedures to be applied to suppliers so you know who you're paying in the end, down to the matching of invoices against goods receipt notes or purchase orders and all that kind of environment. If you're not looking at this whole thing holistically, first of all, your technology project might have issues because it might still have gaps in it. But most and first and foremost, I think you're just trying to satisfy a tax administration's requirements. And it boils down to one simple statement that I've made a couple of times now. Even a fiscally compliant invoice might not book in your accounting environment because it might actually lack essential data, right? And so the information that we need to convey from here, I think, and given our experience, is you need to create a project that is bigger than that. And you need to create a sustainable, standardized approach to your finance processes in order to be able to not just build them once, but to replicate them, to maintain them, and to keep them up to date with changes that will inevitably come.
And that's what we see when we speak to businesses as well, because I'd say a very common case is that the business is afraid of losing automation when they need to switch into another process for invoicing. And there are basically two cases, either one where this can be solved only simply by onboarding or supplier communications and so on, where you talk to your suppliers on where they want what data and what field and whatnot. But then there are other cases as well where we see that our customers really need to redesign the whole process. I know our colleague Sanna, for example, has been doing very thorough reviews of the whole AP processing, each step. Are you really compliant at each step? Do you really keep the data at each step?
Yeah.
So on.
No, and I think what Sana particularly has unveiled in that particular environment was a customer that was willing to talk to us, and that is already the first step, believe it or not, because the truth is that most customers don't really want to look into this environment because it has worked for a long time. But more importantly, if you are then forced to look into something and you're not looking at it from a strategic perspective, but from a tactical perspective, and that is obviously also something that you have seen a number of times yourself, Gustav. If you're looking at invoice processing or invoice lifecycle management purely from a tactical perspective, you're never going to realize the full value of moving from what used to be a paper-based environment with lots of data problems to a fully automated, if possible, but purely structured data-driven approach. You're not going to solve that by focusing on envelopes, which is formats, right? You're not solving it by focusing on just satisfying what the tax administration puts in front of you. But you're solving it if you're looking into the entire life cycle of an invoice, and that is spanning far wider than just the government or just the booking or just the onboarding, right? It is all together, and that is what you need to do. And I think that is what Sana has uncovered with that particular client, who reluctantly then started to open up. And I think that is a good path forward. You take away the fear, you take away the reluctance, and you're showing people that there is real value to be gained. And by the way, AI is not a threat in that entire process, because if applied at the right points in time, then it makes a lot of sense. But that is where your internal readiness assessment needs to come first.
And assessment is basically looking at mandates as part of the process, right? Because when you have an invoice that you receive, you will have data that will need to go for ESG reporting. You'll have some data that will need to
Yeah.
go for HR reporting. Then you'll have some data that needs to go for tax reporting and so on. So it's really not the one thing that, like you say, defines the whole invoice, that a physical invoice is all I need, but you really need to consider the physical part of it as just part of the invoice
No,
data.
and absolutely. And the funny bit, and I'm glad you're saying it like this, because I would like you to put yourself in the shoes of a chief financial officer. And it doesn't really matter whether you
Oh, I like
sit
the
in
salary
Europe.
part of that.
Well, it's just going to be a matter of time, and I think you're going to be a brilliant CFO one of these days. But maybe you're going to be the chief compliance officer first. But look, all joking aside, if you put yourself in the shoes of a CFO, and it doesn't matter where you sit, whether you're sitting in Europe or you're sitting in Asia or you're sitting in the US. Um, Even in the US, where everyone is sort of marginalizing the importance of compliance on a consistent basis, which I couldn't actually disagree more with, because even the US has very strict rules around your accounting processes. It's the only country
Yeah, of
that
course.
publishes errors and omissions, calling the people by their name and listing the penalties that have been dished out to them. If you are in that kind of situation, if you're that person who signs off the annual results of your business, don't you want assurances that the data that you're using with your teams to produce such annual results can be relied upon? My personal view is yes. I mean,
Mm.
is there an option? There's no option, right? And so I think it's the time, and I think also the report that we have generated based on the particular the US part of the FT longitude report that we've created, it just points out that it's a generic thing. It doesn't matter whether you're sitting in an indirect tax country or whether you're sitting in the US with the sales and use tax. It is an inherent necessity to have reliable process designs that you can trust, that deliver you transparency. Because in the end, a government mandate is not implemented to allow for a company to have transparent business accounts. The mandate is implemented to give the government the transparency over what on earth have you been doing over the entire year. And if you're relating that back to countries like Mexico that have been early with implementing these mandates, it was never designed to make businesses' lives easier. It was designed to find out those that were violating their obligations. And in the case of Mexico, to put them behind bars if necessary. That was this big picture. I will never forget that in my entire life, that picture that showed the man behind bars and the tax administration saying, if you don't follow the rules, this is where you might end up. I think that's just the most important thing to consider.
And just to mention for our listeners and viewers that we are publishing a US specific report on compliance. And like what you were saying now, Marcus, that compliance is indeed very much a thing for the US as well. We found, for example, that US companies are 5 times more likely to pay fines than the rest of the world because of well, not being up to speed with compliance. Time is flying, Marcus, and there's something I want to cover as well, and that is a very good article you published on LinkedIn that you said you called it the big shift from
Mhm.
are we compliant to are we ready? Where you're basically talking about moving moving the viewpoint from managing compliance country by country, and then on the other hand you have organizations trying to build global ecosystems for finance and so on, and how you were saying that the winners here are not the ones who have the most mandates implemented, the most countries under the belt, but rather the ones who use this moment to rethink how finance works altogether. I think this is, again, what we've been talking about for the last 10, 15 minutes now on the ERP transformation try thing. But tell us more, like, what is your recommendations there? What are things that you have seen with regards to
You,
this?
what I mean, sometimes I'm looking at the calendar and I'm thinking, what on earth have I been doing with my life? Having spent having spent 27 years in the area of electronic document compliance. But yeah, everyone needs to have something to hold on to, right? And I'm quite passionate about this topic. Otherwise,
Oh, you
I
are.
wouldn't do. Oh, yeah, slightly. I mean, can you see that? No, honestly. I think what bothers me, it's probably the wrong word or maybe too strong of a word, is that for a very long time, misunderstandings were like the commonality and the common denominator across the discussions that were revolving around digitization, compliance, invoice compliance, electronic invoicing, the mandates, and what have you. Too many people thought for too long that, for example, teaching a machine to read is electronic invoicing, aka scanning an OCR. Where in fact, what most of these things did was to prevent people or give people an opportunity not to change. Change management has been the consistent. And I think if 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 you're building a strategy to respond to what is now an inevitable situation concerning the governments now forcing you to make yourself very honest and literally drop your financial pants in front of them. You need to create an approach and you need to be willing to invest in a project that gives you as much of an opportunity to retain a global standardized invoice process that is aligned with your procurement strategy, with your digital procurement strategy, that is aligned with your internal process setup in terms of receiving goods and services and booking them accordingly and making sure that invoices that are inbound can be matched against those, so that you're really focusing on clean process and a data-driven approach to your finance and accounting processes. Because if you have that in place and if you've selected the right service provider to help you through the maze of these mandates as and when they pop up, then a data-driven approach is going to it's going to not give you an automated ability to respond to the mandates, but it's certainly going to give you an easier way to satisfy those mandates as and when they occur. And that's the most important part. And the final one, and I don't want to miss out on that one, and don't hold the boring sign in my face because it's far from boring. We are seeing process relocations from where they were before in the ERP space, and that is kindly and nicely closing the loop with our discussion at the beginning about S4HANA, for example. Processes are moving upstream from the ERP space more into the platform provider space. Think about the reporting in France. Think about VAT and tax reporting at the source of the data. You can see this process of tax engines moving away from the ERP space upstream more towards the core of the transaction, the origin of the transaction, in order to be at the source of the data, at the truth, the one truth of the data, so that they can deliver their services more in a more agile environment with higher quality and much better impact on the business process improvements. So we will also feel and see some changes in the ERP space. And I'm not going to chime into the chorus of people that are calling the ERP space dead. That's not the case, right? There will still be accounting systems and whatever. But the process infrastructure and architecture is also going to change.
And I think the one thing I heard that I liked was about the ownership, that you need to have clear compliance ownership, and that's rarely something that we experience when we talk to businesses, I'd say.
It's a hot potato. No one wants it. Everyone needs it. No one wants it. But I think what I just realized that for the first time, I think, Gustav, we've been able to even weave in the tips section into our overall discussion. Isn't that brilliant? We are getting better and better every time.
Yeah, and we are providing tips for the CFO, a CFO to-do list that we are publishing now as well. So let's move over to some of the lighter news here. One thing that I found, and I posted on this on LinkedIn as well, because I thought it was pretty amazing, was that in Malawi, we had people on the street picketing, demonstrating against e-invoicing with signs on the streets. And it turns out what the government did was they increased the VAT rate, and then at the same time, they introduced e-invoicing. So of course, people or business owners saw the ones as very much linked together, that, now suddenly we're going to have stricter enforcement and I'm forced to pay more taxes. Of course, I'm not going to like, the e-invoicing. And I think this is a good example of how a government could have perhaps done it in a different way, have the VAT hike separate from the invoicing or communicate better or so on.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
I
true.
think you had similar experiences in Mexico, didn't you?
Yeah, well, the anecdote I mentioned earlier is testament to that one. But I do remember a meeting where the Mexican tax administration invited like the biggest taxpayers in Mexico to those introductory sessions. And it made it very clear that they are not there, as I said earlier, they weren't introducing these projects and new processes and requirements to make businesses' lives easier. They were introducing it to improve tax collection and fight the shadow economy. And quite frankly, it doesn't really matter how you phrase it and what kind of nice envelope you wrap it in. But I think it should be very clear that the times where the governments and the administrations were more relaxed about how you report, what you report, and what needs to happen if you actually erroneously report things, that time's over.
Hmm.
And I think when that sort of arrives in front of your door, then the approach as a CFO, as a senior finance person, as a finance responsible person, needs to change as well. And I think now's the time. The time was probably already 10 years ago, but with the governments now on scene, you need to get going.
And speaking of getting going, now we can finally trust the French invoicing manner to happen, or I'd say, almost trust, because now the budget has been approved, right? So the only thing that could hinder it now would be the system failing some kind of audit, right? But we're gonna go ahead now.
I think it's going to go through. I think it's going to go through. There's no way anyone's going to stop it. The budget's approved, and I think we also need to just accept that the governments have actually gathered some experience in the meantime, and I think there's really nothing that's going to stop it.
Mhm. And for that, we did see as well the OECD publish a report on recommendations for how to implement e-invoicing and so on, how to work there. And my main takeaway there was really the governments should learn from each other, which is not really something we see a lot of in terms of how the mandates are designed, do we?
Now this goes back, Gustav. Thank you for saying that. That goes back to the experience with Switzerland issuing the first legislation on electronic invoicing
Yep.
and what they would require an electronic invoice to look like in order for them to accept it in lieu of a paper invoice. I do remember that the European Commission reviewed all of that and found it very insightful because, of course, it was Swiss engineering, even on a legal level. It was actually very well done. And then, yeah, it's 27 years later, and every single country in Europe has their own approach. Vida has a very extensive timeline, and the national flavors are never going to go away.
No,
PEPL is
it
no
is
longer a European project, is deployed in countries like Australia. So yeah, it's gonna look fine. I mean, I agree with you. Countries should learn from each other, and we have very, very good examples, like in Mexico, with systems that work extremely well. But will that mean that everyone goes down that same road? I don't think so.
Well, our time is up, Markus.
Too bad.
Yes, we spoke about ERP upgrades at length, and it
Yeah.
got kind of technical, but I'm hoping, nobody was missing the sign here, the boring sign. We spoke about the upcoming, all the upcoming mandates and how they do affect US as well, and our upcoming report on the US.
Absolutely. And we spoke about you being the toughest compliance guy out there. Kudos.
You put his chat, Markus.
Thank you so much. See you next time.
See you. Bye.
And that's a wrap. Thank you. Join us again next quarter for compliance without the boring bits.